As I said in the previous video, the people knew that their planet was going to become uninhabitable within 500 years. Knowing there were other planets, inhabited and inhabitable in the galaxy, they mounted one of the most serious exploratory expeditions. Eventually, they penetrated our solar system, first visiting Mars, which was known to be inhabitable and which, at that time in fact, was inhabited. The human beings on Mars had no technology, but, by contrast, they were spiritually highly evolved. They were very small people measuring in height between 120 centimeters and 150 centimeters, and of Mongoloid type. They lived in tribes, in huts of stone. The fauna on Mars was scarce. There was a kind of dwarf goat, some very large hare-like creatures, several species of rat, and the largest animal resembled a buffalo, but had a head like a tapir. There were also some birds, and 3 species of snakes, one of which was quite venomous. The flora was also poor, trees attaining no more than 4 meters in height. They had, too, an edible grass that you might compare with buckwheat. The Baccaratinians conducted their research, realizing soon that Mars was also cooling down at a rate which indicated that it would no longer be inhabitable in 4,000 to 5,000 years. In terms of its flora and fauna, it was barely rich enough to sustain those already living there, let alone cope with an emigrant mass from Baccaratini. Besides, the planet did not appeal to them. Thus, the 2 spacecraft headed for Earth. The first landing took place where Australia is now found. At that time, it should be explained that Australia, New Guinea, Indonesia, and Malaysia were all part of the one continent. A strait existed, about 300 kilometers wide, exactly where Thailand is now found. In those times, Australia possessed a great inland sea fed by several large rivers, so that diverse and interesting flora and fauna flourished there. All things considered, the astronauts chose this country as their first immigration base. I must say, to be more precise, that the black race chose Australia, and the yellow people established themselves where Burma is now. Here, too, was a land rich in wildlife. Bases were quickly set up on the coast, on the Bay of Bengal, while the black people constructed their first base on the shores of the inland sea in Australia. Later, further bases were established where New Guinea is presently located. Their spacecraft were capable of superlight speeds and took approximately 50 of our Earth years to bring 36 million black people and the same number of the yellow race to Earth. This bears witness to the perfect understanding and excellent association between 2 races determined to survive on a new planet and exist in peace. By common agreement, the aged and infirmed remained in Baccaratini. The Baccaratinians had explored all of the planet Earth before establishing their bases, and were absolutely persuaded that no human life existed before their arrival. Often they thought they had located a humanoid form of life, but on closer inspection realized they had made contact with a species of large apes. Gravity on Earth was stronger than on their planet, and it was quite uncomfortable initially for the 2 races, but eventually they adapted very well. In building their towns and factories, they were fortunate to import from Baccaratini certain materials which were very light and, at the same time, very strong. I have not yet explained that, at that time, Australia was on the equator. Earth rotated on a different axis, taking 30 hours and 12 minutes to complete a rotation, and achieved a revolution around its sun in 280 such days. The equatorial climate was not as you will find it today. It was much more humid than now, for the Earth's atmosphere has changed. Herds of huge zebras roamed the country, in company with enormous edible birds, referred to as dodos, very large jaguars, and another bird measuring almost 4 meters in height, which people have called dinornis. In certain rivers, there were crocodiles up to 15 meters in length and snakes 25 to 30 meters long. They, at times, nourished themselves on the new arrivals. Most of the flora and fauna on Earth was totally different from that on Baccaratini, both from a nutritional and ecological point of view. Numerous experimental farms were established in an endeavor to acclimatize plants such as sunflower, maize, wheat, sorghum, tapioca, and others. These plants either didn't exist on Earth or else existed in such a primitive state that they couldn't be consumed. The goat and the kangaroo were both imported, for the immigrants were quite partial to these, consuming them in great numbers on their planet. They were particularly keen to raise kangaroos on Earth, experiencing enormous difficulties, however, in acclimatizing them. One of the main problems was food. On Baccaratini, the kangaroo fed on a fine, hardy grass called arilu, which was totally unknown on Earth. Each time the Baccaratinians tried to grow it, it died, attacked always by millions of microscopic fungi. So it happened that the kangaroo were hand-fed, so to speak, for several decades, as they gradually adapted to the grasses on Earth. The black race persevered in its endeavors, and finally succeeded in growing the plant. But it had taken so long that the kangaroos no longer required more than their new pastures. Very much later, some arilu plants took root, and, as there were no animals to eat them, they spread throughout Australia. They still exist under the botanical name Xanthoria and the popular name grass trees. On Earth, this grass grows much taller and thicker than it did on Baccaratini, but that often happens when species are introduced from other planets. This plant is one of the rare vestiges of those distant times. It indicates, by being found only in Australia, along with the kangaroo, that the Baccaratinians remained in that particular part of the planet for a very long time, before seeking to colonize other parts. I am about to explain this, but I wanted first to cite the examples of the kangaroo and the Xanthoria, so that you might better understand all the problems of adaptation these people had to overcome. Of course, it is only one small example among so many others. The yellow race had settled, as I said, in the hinterland of the Bay of Bengal. Most were in Burma, where they too had established cities and experimental farms. Principally interested in vegetables, they had imported from Baccaratini cabbages, lettuce, parsley, coriander, and some others. For fruit, they brought the cherry tree, the banana, and the orange trees. These last two were difficult to establish, for the climate of the time was generally colder than it is now. Thus, they gave some of the trees to the blacks, who, by contrast, had enormous success with them. In the same way, the yellow people had far greater success in the growing of wheat. In fact, the wheat from Baccaratini produced enormous grains, around the size of a coffee bean, with ears measuring up to 40 centimeters in length. 4 varieties of wheat were grown, and the yellow race wasted no time in establishing a very high production level. You might think, did they also bring rice to the planet? No, not at all. Rice is a plant absolutely native to Earth, although it was greatly improved by the yellow people on its way to becoming what it is now. To continue, immense silos were constructed, and soon commercial exchanges began between the two races. The black race exported kangaroo meat, dodos, which were prolific at the time, and zebra meat. In domesticating the latter, the blacks, in fact, produced breeds that were equal in taste to kangaroo meat and more nutritious. Trade was carried out using Baccaratini spacecraft, bases for these vessels having been set up all over the land. You might also wonder if the first human on Earth were black and yellow. How is it then that some people come to be white? But not so fast. The first human on Earth were, indeed, the blacks and the yellows, but for the moment I will continue to explain how they organized themselves and how they lived. Materially, they were successful, but they were also careful not to neglect the construction of their immense meeting halls in which they practiced their cult. They were all tachyoni, which is to say, they all believed in reincarnation, something in the way present-day Lamists do on our planet. There was much travel between the two countries, and they even combined efforts to explore deeper into certain regions of Earth. A mixed group of blacks and yellows landed one day on the tip of South Africa, now called the Cape of Good Hope. Africa has changed very little since those times, apart from the Sahara, the northeastern area, and the Red Sea, which didn't exist then. But that is another story we will get to later. At the time of the exploration, they had already been established on Earth for 3 centuries. In Africa, they discovered new animals such as the elephant, the giraffe, and the buffalo, and a new fruit that they had never before encountered, the tomato. But this was the tomato as you know it today. When discovered, it was the size of a very small currant and very acidic. The yellow people, having developed great expertise in such things, undertook to improve the tomato over the succeeding centuries, just as they did with rice, until it became the fruit you are now familiar with. They were equally surprised to find banana trees that, at first sight, resembled those they had imported. They had no reason to regret their efforts, however, for the African banana was practically inedible and filled with large seeds. This African expedition comprised 50 blacks and 50 yellows, bringing home elephants, tomatoes, and many manjis, for they soon discovered the mongoose to be the mortal enemy of snakes. Unfortunately, they also brought with them, without realizing it, the terrible virus, which is now called yellow fever. In a very short time, millions of people had died, without their medical experts even knowing how the sickness had spread. Since it is mainly spread by the mosquito, and since there are many more mosquitoes in equatorial climates where there is no winter to reduce their numbers, it was the blacks in Australia who suffered most. In fact, they counted 4 times more victims than the yellows. The yellow race on Baccaratini has always been superior in the field of medicine and pathology. Nevertheless, it took many years before they discovered a remedy for this curse, during which time hundreds of thousands died in terrible suffering. Eventually, the yellow people produced a vaccine that was immediately made available to the blacks, a gesture that reinforced the bonds of friendship between the two races. Some people may ask, what were they physically like, these blacks? When they migrated from Baccaratini, they were about 230 centimeters tall. Their women, too. They were a beautiful race. The yellow people were smaller in size, the average man measuring 190 centimeters, and the women 180 centimeters. But I said that the present-day blacks are the descendants of those people. Why is it they are now so much smaller? The answer is gravitation. Being stronger on Earth than on Baccaratini, both races gradually became smaller in size. I also said that Thiauba are able to help people in trouble. Why did they not give any assistance in regard to the yellow fever outbreak? Was it that they weren't able to find the vaccine either? In fact, they're able to help. You will realize their potential when you read the book Thiauba Prophecy, but they didn't intervene because it wasn't in the program that they had to follow. They can help in certain situations, but only so far. Beyond a certain point, the law strictly forbids aid of any kind. The law we are talking about is the universal law, which was established by the Creator. I'll give you a simple example. Imagine a child who goes to school each day in order to learn. Returning home in the evening, this child asks for assistance with his homework. If his parents are smart, They will help him understand the concepts involved so that the child can complete his task himself. If, however, his parents did his work for him, he wouldn't learn much, would he? He'd have to repeat each year, and his parents would have done him no favors. As you will see later, although you may know it already, you are on earth in order to learn how to live, suffer, and die, but also to develop spiritually as much as you can.